Today's game is one of the earliest ancestors of the modern board gaming hobby. We're looking at Wizard's Quest, a game published by Avalon Hill in 1979. The game rules spawn hoarding orcs that will frenzy if their numbers get too high, and the game mechanics dictate the movement of a wizard and a dragon. The wizard provides you benefits, the dragon will eat your troops. The box design is the Avalon Hill bookshelf style game. By today's standards, the components and production values are quite minimal. They're very similar playing pieces to what you'll see if you've got a copy of Advanced Squad Leader or any other of the Hex and Chit style games. Wizard's Quest can be played by from 2 to 6 players. The map board portrays the island of Manon, which has been divided into 36 territories and 8 castle spaces. Orcs are placed in approximately 1/3 of these spaces, and players in turn place their men in the remaining unoccupied spaces. An opposing player then places your treasure in the most inaccessible spots he can find. Each turn, orcs currently on the board are reinforced with additional orcs by a random die roll. Spaces which contain 4 orcs then frenzy and attack any and all players in spaces adjacent to their spaces. The dragon then goes marauding as he flies from space to space, determined by a random die roll. He stops his flying for the turn as soon as he lands and devours at least one of the player's men. The wizard also makes a visit to a randomly determined space, bringing with him reinforcements and protection from attack. The board is set up by rolling for the first player, and each player then places one of his men in an unoccupied castle space. 2 orcs are then placed in each of the remaining unoccupied castle spaces. You then place 2 orcs in 2 territories in each region. The first region is determined by tossing 2 dice. Ignore doubles and then place the orc pieces in the numbers rolled by the dice that relate to the territories within the particular region. After treasures have been placed, each player in turn places 10 men in any of the spaces already occupied by that player. A player can substitute 2 of those men for a hero token, or 2 of those men for a sorcerer token. The sequence of play, we start with the orc phase, which begins with orc generation. So you start with the first player. Each player in turn tosses 1 die to determine a region to receive more orcs. Each time a region is determined, 1 orc is added to each orc-occupied territory in the region, and 1 orc is added to each orc-occupied castle adjacent to a territory in that region. You can't place more than 4 orcs in a space. If there's ever a situation where a space contains 4 orcs, the orcs will frenzy and will attack player-occupied spaces adjacent to the orc space until all spaces are either captured or the frenzy space becomes unoccupied or occupied by only 1 orc. At that point, the frenzy stops. Start with the first region, work your way up through all the regions, and finally do the orc frenzy for castle spaces. Within the region, the lowered numbered territory will frenzy first, working your way up. Orcs in a lowered numbered castle space frenzy before orcs in higher numbered castle spaces. As orcs frenzy from a particular space, they attack adjacent spaces in a certain order. The first space to be attacked is the lowest numbered territory in the lowest numbered region adjacent to the frenzy space. Attacks then continue in a clockwise direction from this first space. If the orc attack is successful and the defending force slain, 1 orc is moved from the attacking space into the defeated space to capture it. Once all frenzy spaces have finished attacking, all unoccupied spaces on the board receive 1 orc counter. Play then moves to the dragon attack phase. The dragon counter is moved randomly from territory to territory until it gobbles up at least one man, hero or sorcerer. Each move of the dragon is controlled by rolling 2 dice. The first die roll determines which region the dragon moves to. The second die roll will determine which territory within that region the dragon will land in. The dragon continues to move until it gobbles a space occupied by at least one man, hero or sorcerer. The next phase is the wizard prosper phase. The wizard token moves in the same manner as the dragon counter. The territory into which the wizard counter moves is prospered. It receives either 3 men if a player occupied territory, or 3 orcs if it's an orc-occupied territory. The wizard counter protects the entire region for as long as it occupies a territory in that region. No attacks of any kind can occur against any territory in the same region as the wizard. We then move to the player phase. The first player is determined by rolling 2d6. The highest roll becomes first player for the turn. Beginning with the first player, the player may select a petition card from the petition deck. The card drawn can be played immediately or saved to be played in a later turn, unless it's a card that says play immediately, in which case it must be played when drawn. Up to 2 cards can be saved by each player without being played. If a third card is drawn, at least one of the 3 cards must be played. The next player phase is reinforcements. The player receives a certain number of men as reinforcements each turn. This number is going to depend on the number of kingdom spaces the player's forces currently occupy. A kingdom is either a single castle space or a group of connected spaces which must include at least 1 castle space. The player determines his reinforcements by counting all spaces of all kingdoms that his forces occupy. The next player phase is the attack campaign. One attack campaign can always be initiated. Additional attack campaigns may be initiated by a petition card award or if directed against the wizard or dragon. An attack campaign allows a player to attack forces in a space adjacent to a space occupied by the player. The attack campaign continues until the space being attacked is unoccupied, in which case it must be captured if possible, or if the player decides to discontinue the attack campaign. At the start of the attack campaign and at any time during the campaign, a player's attack may be supplemented by men in spaces adjacent to the attacking space. These men are moved into the attacking space. Any number of supplements may be made during an attack campaign as long as there are men available. If the player captures a space that contains one of his treasures, you remove the treasure and reveal the treasure type. If it's a treasure chest, you receive 4 men, which must be placed in the space previously occupied by the treasure chest. If the treasure type is a crown, the player receives 3 men, which can be placed in any spaces occupied by his forces. If the treasure is a magic ring, the player draws 1 petition card, which he may play immediately or save. When the third treasure is captured, the game ends and that player becomes the winner. Battle is resolved by each combatant tossing 1d6 at the same time. The die toss indicates the number of the opponent's counters that are removed from the space if that toss is within the proper die range. Men have a die range equal to the number of men in the space up to a maximum of 4, similarly with orcs. A die roll beyond the die range is not counted for anything. If it falls within the range, that many of the opponent's tokens are removed. If the hero is involved, he has a die range of 1 by himself and adds 1 to the die range of men in the same space. Similarly, a sorcerer has a die range of 2 and adds 2 to the die range of men in the same space. So the maximum range for 4 or more men and a sorcerer is 6. Some of the terrain benefits defenders. The forest, the mountains and the ancient forest adds 1 to the die range. Well, that's a very brief overview of the rules and the setup. This looks like a really fun game. The orc mechanic of frenzying orcs in many ways reminds me of a game like Pandemic. The combat mechanic is similar to a game like Risk, but the very nature of the game and the victory conditions, they're not going to reward you turtling up. You've got to get out there and get your hands dirty and get your treasures. This is a game that seems to have been pretty much overlooked. It's the game that history seems to have forgotten, which is a bit of a shame because it looks like a lot of fun. If you've got any interest in the development of the board gaming hobby, or if you're a collector, you might want to look this one up. You can pick this one up second hand for a pretty low cost. I can't remember exactly what I paid for my copy, but I'm pretty sure I got some change out of a $20 note, so thumbs up, I recommend this. Until the next time, happy gaming.